Today we're going to examine two very strange missing person cases. But before we get started, welcome to True Crime with Maneater. If you love all things true crime, including missing person cases, cold cases, and just the strange happenings of the world, you've come to the right place. If you'd like to support the channel, and you know I'd appreciate it, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. Let's get started. 50-year-old Juliet Stewart Poyntz was last seen in Manhattan, New York, in June of 1937. It would appear that Juliet left her room in the American Women's Association clubhouse and simply vanished. She was not reported missing until December of that year, and I can't believe that they went 6 or 7 months without reporting this woman missing. Juliet did leave behind all of her personal belongings, including her clothing, luggage, passport, her unfinished manuscripts, and a savings account containing $10,500, which was never touched after her disappearance. And it's important to note that $10,000 back in 1937 was quite a bit of money. When authorities arrived to check out her room and kind of do the missing persons report, they realized that it looked like she planned on returning within a short time of whatever trip that she had been taking that day. Juliet Poyntz was a former history professor at Barnard College and is one of the founding members of the American Communist Party, which came into existence between 1919 and 1921. She was listed in the New York Police Department files as one of the top 10 principal communist leaders in the United States. She would run for public office several times as a communist candidate, but she was never elected. And it turns out Juliet would drop out of the Communist Party in 1934 to work for the OGPU, which was the Russian secret police and predecessor to the KGB. It appears her task was to gather information about chemistry from the US. She traveled to Moscow, Russia in 1936 for additional instructions, but became disillusioned with Joseph Stalin's regime and was unwilling to spy for them. She would later tell friends that she planned to write her memoir and expose the Communist Party. It is firmly believed that Juliet was murdered by the OGPU simply to silence her, and it appears that many people would confess to killing her after her disappearance, but no one was ever charged, and she was declared legally dead in October of 1944, and her estate was given to her sister, who is her sole surviving relative. This case is incredibly interesting because we have this woman who's smart and educated and obviously has a good job, and somehow becomes involved with the Communist Party and Russia and perhaps was killed by them, or she simply could have been harmed by somebody else. 33-year-old Mary Jane Vangilder was born in West Virginia and would attend school up until the 8th grade. She would marry her husband, Jane Leslie Vangilder, in 1929 when she was 17. They would have 7 children. Unfortunately, 2 of them were stillborn, and Mary Jane did not work outside of the home. Unfortunately, her husband was an alcoholic, and Mary would say that he was very abusive towards her. Mary and James would separate in 1943, and strangely enough, the children stayed with James, while Mary initially moved to an apartment in West Virginia. She would then take waitressing and clerking jobs to support herself. If what Mary Jane said was true and James was abusive, it's not surprising to me that she couldn't take her children with her. I'm sure he probably used them to try and control her. At one point, Mary did ask James to come live with her and bring the children, but he would decline her offer. And then in late 1943 or early 1944, it appears that Mary Jane decided to move to Ohio. In March of 1944, Mary would take a job as a storekeeper at the Air Force Depot in Shelby, Ohio. She was then promoted to junior warehouseman on May 31st. In February of 1945, she did file requests to be transferred and reassigned as a high lift and forklift operator in the labor pool. Unfortunately, she never got reassigned. Strangely enough, on March 8th, which was 1 year and 1 day after she started working at the depot, she requested immediate release from her job, citing the reason as, quote, added household duties. She gave her address as a post office box in Willard, and March 8th is the official date of her disappearance, although a former associate would report seeing her in Willard a few weeks later. While in Ohio, Mary Jane did maintain contact with her eldest daughter. Her eldest daughter was named Anna, and she was 14 years old, and they would write to each other. She would send letters, clothes, and war bonds. But then in 1945, she would write to Anna and ask Anna to send her war bonds back to her, and Anna would return the war bonds. But then, strangely enough, a few weeks later, Mary Jane mailed Anna her last $25 war bond with no note, and apparently after that, all contact with her family had abruptly stopped. Mary Jane had filed for divorce on February 14th, 1945, and her divorce petition would accuse James of, quote, extreme cruelty and gross neglect of duty. But it does appear that this phrase was a common one used in divorce proceedings because in Ohio it was defined as failure to provide mutual respect, fidelity, and support, both emotional and physical. On November 23, 1945, back in West Virginia, James had also filed for divorce, and the court records indicate that Mary Jane did not respond to the petition, neither in person or through an attorney. The West Virginia divorce was granted on November 26th, and James did get custody of his 5 children. He would later remarry. In April of 1946, the divorce petition that Mary Jane had filed in Ohio was dismissed because she failed to show up for court. Since 1945, Mary Jane's family has occasionally investigated her disappearance. Anna would eventually write to the FBI on multiple occasions, but they didn't have the jurisdiction to open an investigation. Mary Jane's ex-husband, James, did die in 1985, and the house he shared with Mary Jane burned down not too long afterwards. And then in 2005, a newspaper in Plymouth would publish a story about Mary Jane's disappearance and would ask anyone who remembered her to contact her family. Apparently, a man who had been 13 years old in 1945 saw the article and wrote to Mary Jane's children. The writer of the letter would say that his father and 2 older brothers had worked at the Air Force Depot at the same time as Mary Jane, and that she was friends with his parents. According to the writer, Mary Jane could not drive, and during 1944 and 1945, she often got rides to work with his father and brothers. And that simply was all the information this writer could provide. Police do believe that foul play is a strong possibility, considering it wasn't like her to just cut off contact with her own children. Although she did move and she was separated from her husband, she was still writing her children, and then it suddenly stopped. Because there is such little information about this case, I'm quite curious if James had an alibi for the time that Mary went missing. It'd be interesting to know where he was around this time. Had he made any trips? Was he gone for extended periods of time? What the situation with that was. I would assume because the case is so old and perhaps it wasn't taken seriously when Mary went missing, they didn't actually, question him. And if they did question him, I'm sure they didn't accuse him or think he was a suspect right away. It could be that James is completely innocent and that Mary, unfortunately, met her fate by somebody she worked with, or just that unlucky run-in with a stranger who harmed her in some way. I do think it's strange that she went to work one day and requested immediate release citing household duties. What does that mean? Why did she just quit her job unexpectedly? It's also strange that she wrote to Anna asking for that war bond back and then would eventually mail a $25 one, her last one, back to Anna, but with no letter this time. There are some strange things happening in this case, and I'm very curious to know if Mary Jane perhaps knew her life was in danger, or that something was going to happen to her, or her ex-husband threatened her, or somebody at work threatened her, and she just took the precautions she needed to, but unfortunately it wasn't enough. I would love to know your thoughts on these cases. What happened to these 2 women? But that's it for today, guys. If you like this video and want to support the channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. If there's a case you'd like me to cover, be sure to pop in the comments below and I'll get to it. In the meantime, check out some other videos on my channel while you wait for the next upload, and I'll see you then.